Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar event, Building for the Future Workforce Development for the Frontline. My name is Brian Pena. I am the CEO and founder of Defiant Solutions, as well as Defiant Events and Education. And I'm going to go ahead and do some housekeeping and set the stage for our main event today, which is going to be Jimmy and Cynthia sharing some key knowledge and learning on this very important and timely topic. Let's get right into it, shall we? So first, we hopefully you joined us for our speed networking session. I think we had about 20 plus people there at some point or another. Great dialogue, great interaction, really great to meet some of you folks. Now we're going to go into some housekeeping, and then I'm going to explain the intricacies of this particular topic, and then we're going to get started. As with every Defiant event, I love the fact that we present to a global audience, a truly global audience. Everybody from Bangladesh and Brazil to UK, UAE, Tunisia, and the like. I must say, though, this is our very first time, I think, ever having somebody from Malta on the line. Rachel Falzone, welcome from Malta. Thank you for joining us today, and I certainly hope it's worth the time and getting up early in the morning or staying up late. Who is Defiant Events and Education? We are a educational production company where we work with HR tech platforms and providers of all sizes and shapes on advancing their narrative in the future of work. And Defiant Solutions is our consulting brand where we work strategically as a strategic partner for people in HR tech space and enterprises who are trying to develop what the future of work is going to look like. And now we get into some of the access and control panels. You can see on the top, other attendees with a little person section there. If you want to leave direct messages to anyone on the panel or to somebody else you may see, that little button there for direct messages on that little bell will be the place where we post announcements, alerts, and calls to action. If you want to also share your events, you're sharing your thoughts with other folks in the event, go ahead and put the comments there and it'll be broadcast to everybody. Keep it PG, thankfully. If you have any questions for us, there's a Q&A tab. You can post your questions directly, and then Canada is going to do our best to try and curate. We are very keen to take questions throughout the session, and we welcome your feedback. So please don't be shy. We're going to make sure we get a lot of them prepared for you, but we want to make sure we address yours as you have them come up. We will be posting polls. I'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. And then the little downward arrow will hide those panels if you don't like them being on the right-hand side of your screen. I recognize that the AirMeet platform sometimes can present very narrowly on your browser. If you want to go ahead and have the full screen being taken up, press that little button on the upper right-hand side of your screen, you should see, and it will automatically expand it to cover the entire screen. We do really like to have polls as a part of every one of these sessions and events. And so I encourage you to take a good look at it. And so as a test, I always like to run with the same question, which is this: what is your favorite superpower? So if you could take a second to go ahead and answer that particular question, that'd be great. And then we'll share the results at the end of it if we get enough responses. Moving on, one of the things that is also a unique feature of Defiant Events is we have a roundtable structure. We're able to interact with the speakers and each other, as well as just have general discussion. We invite you to stay afterwards. We keep those tables open as long as we need to. And oftentimes people speak to that as being one of the best benefits of these events is the ability to interact one-on-one consistently in replicating the live experience. And I want to go ahead and get ahead of the question that's going to be asked. Invariably, yes, slides will be available afterward. We got so much data. I think, honestly, this is the most data-intensive slide deck or presentation that we've ever put together. And it's going to be available for everybody who's interested afterwards, after the survey. Are you ready for your own Defiant event? I know a number of you on this call are looking into ways to amplify your message, how you can get your channel out. These are actual ratings from all of our live events, most 6 recent live and public events we've had. We continue to get fantastic ratings. If you're interested in learning more about how we might be able to help you with this, or whatever your challenges may be in terms of amplifying your message as a provider, please don't be shy. Scan it. You'll notice we like QR codes because we recognize that you might not be able to type it. So just go ahead and scan it with your phone and set up a time for us to talk a little bit about what we can do to help you. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Setting the stage. I always like to set the stage a little bit to allow our speakers to really own some of the narrative that they're going to do when they share their genius. So what does the frontline define? When we look at the frontline, most of the conversations we're going to have here are about call center workers. How do you amplify and elevate the professionalism of your call center. It's a real key issue because, frankly, in 2021, there was approximately 2.7 million Americans work in a call center. That is a tremendous number of people. It is a huge opportunity. Of that 2.7 million, 69% are overwhelmingly women, 31% are men. The average age is 40 years old, and calls considered difficult by customer service agents grew over 100% at the height of the pandemic, which is frankly not surprising. And then finally, it's a huge market. If we think about call center, multimedia access centers, and customer interaction centers of all kinds, it's a $424 billion business as of 2024. Tremendous amount of spend on this frontline focus, as well as the ability of individuals to engage with brands in new and exciting ways. And why is that important? I always like to use the metaphor that the most important person in the supermarket is the person who bags your groceries, the person often the last in the chain, because if they consistently put soup on top of your eggs and they break them, you're not going to go back anymore. So the frontline experience is critical to business. It's not just critical to business. Theoretically, it's critical in terms of brand loyalty. As you can see, this is a survey out of Finances Online, a really simple survey, which is not surprising to anybody, that says that customer service and brand loyalty go hand in hand, either somewhat important or very important. That's not entirely shocking. But at the same time, these call center workers are also your customers. That's something that oftentimes we forget, is that people who work in these call centers represent your customers as well. And that has an impact on business. This is a survey of advancing that concept about what happens after somebody has a negative candidate or employment experience with a particular brand. And given the fact that many of your frontline workers come through contingent workforce agencies, the velocity of those individuals is significantly greater. So therefore, their experience matters that much more, not just from the ability of them to impact your ability to hire candidates in the future, but also the ability of you to sell your products in the revenue line. If you look at this particular chart here, where you can see there here, that the negative experience will encourage people on about 42% to either not buy your company's products or tell others not to buy it. So the consequences of a negative experience are tremendous and in the negative, but at the same time, it could also be on the positive. If someone has a great experience with a given brand, they're much more likely to, one, purchase the company's products or tell others to purchase the company's products. So if you think about that, it is a hugely important thing that even though they're contingent workers, that even though they're frontline workers, their experience has a very significant and real brand effect to your overall ability to have commerce. And at the same time, in many programs, why are they often an afterthought? I think the fact of the matter is most contingent workforce programs focus on high strategic and high volume or high dollar positions. In most workforce strategies, the call center or the frontline tends to be something that's like almost forgotten. Why is that? I think the reason why, it's business as usual. People are thinking they're perceived as expendable. Sometimes the turnover is crazy, or you've outsourced the entire thing. It's low margin, low savings. And sometimes there's often a lack of innovation in terms of bringing that sort of population into the light. So now what? So now this is what we're doing to set the stage for the main event, which is Jimmy and Cynthia. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. I'm going to call them up to the stage. If you give me just a minute to get to on stage. Guys, welcome. Jimmy, there you are. And coming. There we go. Great to see you both.
Hey, Brian.
Cynthia, Jimmy, thank you so much for joining us. And I am more than happy to hand the ball off for you guys to share your requisite brilliance. Why don't you guys take it away? Jimmy, go ahead.
All right. Thanks so much, Brian. Cynthia and I are very excited to be here and talking about workforce development for the front line. Quick anecdote, Brian, you mentioned around the grocery workers and the most important person being there. My late grandfather used to always say, hey, when it comes to society, one of the most important people always that frontline trash collector, because it's such a downstream impact on how our society runs. And what happens if that person goes away? Very apropos for today. We're going to kick off with a few brief introductions here. Yeah, Brian, you keep rolling. Cynthia, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here. So I'm not going to go over my work experience. Anybody who wants to check that out, go on LinkedIn, You can see my profile. Feel free. I will connect with you and be happy to do that. I'm going to go with the stronger side of a work life balance and talk about my life instead. I'm very proud to be a wife, a mother, as we call it, granny. I have a lot of outdoor activities that I do. The picture here is one, you can see the overwhelming joy on my face. It was the first time I caught a 30-inch northern pike, and it was in Canada this summer. Believe it or not, it was summer. And the last thing I'll mention is a little fun fact about me. I used to ride a motorcycle. I've since put it away, but I did travel and ride a motorcycle across four, 12 states in 14 days.
Wow.
So, Jimmy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. I'm going to take a page out of your book here. And if you want to find me, it's LinkedIn/Jimmy I. So you don't have to worry about spelling my last name with all of those letters. But the same thing, as you can see, if you want to talk about joy in a picture, there's me with my son celebrating the Eagles' recent, which has been great. And yeah, Oliver, I have a COVID baby born in August of last year. I prefer lakes over beaches. There's a fact for me. All Philadelphia sports, as you can see with me and Oliver here. And my wife likes to say, while you don't play video games, you play Microsoft Excel. So that is kind of my video game. And my random fun fact is that I've seen the Rolling Stones, my favorite band, in 3 different countries. So that's been quite the road trips for me. But yes, feel free to connect with me, LinkedIn/Jimmy I.
And just so everyone know, at the end of the session, everyone's LinkedIn profile will be available via QR code.
Perfect.
Yeah. So
I don't expect anybody to remember how to spell Iannuzzi. We can go with that. But yeah, we'll kick up. Cynthia and I have 2 real pillars that we're looking to discuss here today. And the first one is around frontline worker retention, productivity, and engagement. And so when we begin each session, we're going to talk about something called the bottom line up front. This is our power statement around what's going on, and it's going to lend itself into the conversation to come. I will start and say, we really would love some questions. We've built a lot of time, not a lot, we've built a good amount of time into Q&A here, having folks ask some questions. Cynthia and I do not necessarily need to lecture. We would love for this to be an interactive conversation. Why don't you go ahead? Yep. So here's our bottom line up front with retention, productivity, and engagement. Frontline workers are disengaged, resulting in an increase in negative attrition and low productivity. This is one of the number 1 problems that business executives are facing. And then the way we measure a successful frontline worker is disconnected from worker needs, leading to the above. These are intrinsically tied together. So we're going to get into some numbers here next, Brian. You go ahead, and Cynthia was going to take it.
Yep. So $24,000 to me, that's a lot of money. If I had to outlay $24,000 for something other than a car or home, I might be a little perturbed. So what that number is actually, I used to run the contingent labor program at Allstate, and $24,000 was the cost of our turnover for our call center workers based on a 40% turnover rate. And so this cost includes the cost of the contingent worker, the cost of the trainer, the cost of the training itself, pretty significant in the marketplace, especially for an organization that had large call centers with a ton of contingent workers. So it's pretty significant. Brian, you can click on. So again, that was based on a 40% turnover rate. So I'll let you guys run those numbers, but it was a significant cost and something that we really needed to work on. And this was both for contingent and for full time. So another unique number is 81,000 and some change hours. So this is how much time in our life most of us will spend working. The only thing we spend more time doing is sleeping, for those of you who sleep well. If we spend so much time at work, how is our life going? According to the world's workers not well. Gallup poll ran a survey and found that 60% of the people are emotionally detached from work
Mm.
and 19% are miserable. That's awful. So why aren't we spending more time and ways to improve either our own work environment or those of the people who work in our organizations? So, Jimmy, do you have some thoughts about
Yeah.
the numbers?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the numbers I have on here is 26.45%. And this is actually represents a real number from EdTech. This is a case study we ran in terms of reducing our negative attrition in our frontline worker categories. What did we do? Well, we simply leverage an IT platform. I'll give Sense HQ a shout out here because I love the team there and they're great. We implemented Sense HQ as a way to better engage and measure satisfaction of our contingent workers. In a 1 year period, we dropped our negative attrition in frontline workers by 26.45%. We always say too, we often think of contingent workers as an extended workforce or a non-employee workforce. We have all of these terms that catalog them, but at the end of the day, they're people and these people want to be engaged. And if you just reach out, shake their hand every now and again, let them know we're thinking about them, have a way for them, an outlet for them to provide feedback, that goes such a long way. So for me, this number is really about intention and being intentional about how you work with your frontline workers. They have the hardest job in most companies. They bear the brunt of your customers' frustration. They bear the brunt of production delays and having to work harder and longer. So if we're not intentional about reaching them and seeing where they are, we're going to see 40% turnover. We're going to see that translate into 24,000 reduction and that 19% people are miserable at work. That's going to make its way to your customers in the front line. Who is interacting with your customers a lot, or who is having impact on your customer experience? Probably your frontline worker.
So we did have some audience submitted questions. Let's go to the first one. So, Jimmy, I'm going to ask you this question first, and I can give you my 2 cents worth. So,
Sure.
are you finding that working from home options are increasing people working multiple jobs at the same time, and any impact on productivity?
Yeah. So this is a really interesting question. I was happy to see it submitted ahead of time. When you registered, people submitted questions because I think it's the wrong framing, and no disrespect to anybody who submitted this question. But working from home options, one, are allowing folks more opportunity to work. And I think at the end of the day, to break down those barriers of commutes, cost of driving and insurance is a good thing. We should be allowing people who can work from home to work from home. And then we have this question about productivity or working multiple jobs. If you have a really great work environment, a good structure that's built upon expected outcomes, then whether someone works another job or not is almost irrelevant. And so it's very hard to tell unless you're really putting that software on your computer. You can monitor click throughs and all of that. It's really hard to tell if somebody's working another job. But at the end of the day, you should have faith in your metrics and your expected outcomes. And that should be the standard, not necessarily, well, are they working another job or not? Unfortunately, in certain economies, people do have to work other jobs. That's just the reality, especially in frontline workers. I know our frontline workers, you hear it. Hey, sometimes I do need to pull that second half shift or that other part-time job. It's really about, do you have clear expectations for that worker and are they meeting their productivity standard? The rest of the question, I think it's the wrong framing of the question, to be frank.
One of the things where we see that, and I think there's some recent news, I think Equifax did that where they laid off a bunch of people who were working 2 jobs at a time. And it was really interesting debate in the kind of the social media about people. Why is that important? Why does it even matter? I think I completely agree. The thing that qualifies a lot of folks is what if they're using company assets to work on somebody else's dime? That's where things get a little
Sure.
in general.
And I think even before folks could work at home, people were working multiple jobs and
Yeah.
they were still able to maintain. So I don't think it's necessarily increasing folks who need to work two jobs to work two jobs. I think it's allowing them maybe to put in more hours in two different places.
Yeah.
But you're right. The asset is the component. And the most important thing for people working, whether at home or not, is to measure productivity and not, it's not about the hours.
Yeah.
And we're gonna talk a little bit more about measuring productivity and how you can motivate that frontline worker.
What
Yeah,
the
actually, I see we put it in there in the chat, Ashley. Meta productivity based on outputs and outcomes not present to yes. I love that. That's what it is at the end of the day. And I think a lot of these terms, this question is built from an employer centric mindset, not necessarily from an employee centric mindset. And
Yeah.
so as the workforce has shifted and we've seen more of an equilibrium of employee to employer, it's important to recognize and that's part of it, what matters to the employee. And I think for their clear expectations of what's expected, a reasonable way to do it and accomplish those goals and being consistent in that measurement is what's key. Whether you're working two jobs because you're working from home or not is, like I said, a secondary thing. The asset question you raised, Brian, that's a reasonable one, but I think that's something that's more of a sidebar. That's something that, you
I
know,
definitely think so. I
you
completely,
you teams can solve and figure out what's there. But when it comes to the core of what it means to work, I think it's incumbent upon the employer to make sure you're setting those clear expectations and outcomes.
I completely agree.
Yep. So let's go on to the next question. Jimmy, do you think diversity, equity, inclusion has a role in improving productivity, retention, and morale and engagement for contingent workers and frontline workers?
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely do believe that's extremely important. When you think about what brings a culture, a company culture, I think culture is such a buzzword these days, but taking a step, what does it mean? And I think having a diverse, equitable, and inclusive environment makes culture. People want equal representation and they want fairness and equal access to whether it's promotions or resources. And so when you don't have that, I think you can really have a negative domino effect on how your workers are feeling about the work they're doing. But when they see that the company is offering a diverse environment, an equitable environment, an inclusive environment, that sense of fairness creates that culture and makes people want to stay. That's not the case in every job. So that can be a real differentiator for organizations that deploy contingent workers. And so I think it's lost on it. And for me, I always like to throw this out. This was the best way diversity versus equity was described to me was diversity was having everyone invited to the party. Inclusivity and equity was being invited to plan the party. And I thought that was a really good point. I just thought I'd throw that in there during this slide, but absolutely morale. At the end of the day, DEI is meant to promote fairness in the work where it historically maybe hasn't been. When fairness is instilled through DE&I, you're going to see your contingent workers, morale increase, engagement increase, and overall that's going to lead to better retention.
There's, there was
Oh, go ahead.
also a survey done. I can't remember who did it, but that not only contingent workers, but it was for contingent workers, but also employees, that the culture of an organization is becoming one of the key decisions around joining an organization. And so many folks, they want that culture to be one that has diversity, equity, and inclusion in it. And it might be that a company, especially for frontline workers, maybe are reaching out to a particular community to bring in more people. That's a feel good component and adds to the culture of the organization. And ultimately, you can, I'll say, fill your jobs better and faster.
Yeah. You don't like have people create service terrorism where they tell 10 friends that they had a bad experience and talk about before. We have a question from the audience that I don't know the answer to necessarily, but I would love to get your perspective on it, which is how do you suggest we assess the impact or cost of turnover on those individuals who stay. We just focus on the replacement expense of those individuals. And
Yeah.
maybe Cynthia, that notion about increased stress, increased workload, it's like it's a networking effect where negative experiences, I imagine, compounded. Thank you, Karen, for that question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know how you measure it, but I'd like to honestly like to figure that out. That's like the magic sauce because it does in negative turnover impacts the rest of the team dramatically because they see those people walking out the door. And the downside is that can exacerbate more people walking out the door, whether they haven't a reason or not. It's like all these people are leaving. What am I missing? Maybe I should get out of here too. Maybe nobody shared it with me, but I need to leave. Uh, I think, yeah, I don't know how you would measure that.
But I
I
imagine like a contagion. Like it's
yeah. I'll let me jump in for a second. This is the beauty of being in a hot seat. I don't have the study in front of me, but I read something recently when it was talking about sudden departures or mass departures that you can expect, like if 10 people quit on a Friday, then over the next month, 5 people also will do because of those 10 people, not necessarily because of another reason. So there is a contagion to it. But another thing I like to point out as well that I think is underutilized and something that at NTech I love are the concept of stay interviews. I think we talk a lot about exit interviews and why people are leaving, which is very important. Don't get me wrong. NTech is actually having an OKR right now to address negative attrition, understand the whys behind it. But some of the secret sauce could be interviewing the people who are staying. Why do they like being there? Why aren't they walking out the door? Help understand that. Maybe they have a compelling story that we're not talking about to others, or maybe they've been given a unique opportunity because of their group that could be expanded into other areas. And so when I talk about the people who stay, I think in today's environment of the great resignation, the great reshuffle, retirement, any number of them, the great terms that we're using, we're talking about people leaving. And I really think we need to lean into the folks who are there, understand their story, understand what's working for them, and see how that can be applied elsewhere as a way to mitigate some of this negative attrition. But that's a side answer to a question. I'm not hitting it directly, but it did spur that thought for me.
I actually think you hit it pretty well, and I think we need to go. We're going to hold you accountable for finding that study eventually, and
Yes.
then we're going to make sure that that's available for people after the fact. But I
I
also
love
wrote
that.
the notion of the stay interview. So many KPIs. If you look at MSP KPIs or KPIs among providers, exit interviews is a key KPI, but stay interviews and why people stick around, that's not usually done. So I really like that notion. Thanks so much,
Like,
Jimmy.
it's a good lead into our next slide on thoughts and strategies. Y- One of the things that goes along with that is engaging the existing worker. When I think about a call center manager and in some of the folks I've dealt with, I ask them, how often do you ask your frontline worker, how are they doing? Not in the sense of that passing, hey, how are you? And somebody says, fine, and you all walk in the opposite directions. But really, how are you doing? Are you feeling stressed today? Did you feel stressed yesterday? What's going on in your life? Did you feel worried? What did you feel physical pain? For anybody who's doing more lifting in that frontline side of work. And then if it listen to them. My mother always said, God gave you 2 ears, 2 eyes, and 1 mouth, and they should all be used in that proportion. Listen to your frontline worker. uh, Seek to understand who they are and what's going on in that world. Just the fact that you've asked, you've listened, you cared, you've asked follow up questions will motivate them to do better because they want to, most folks want to, they're people pleasers and they want to please what you're the person they're talking to. I think that's really a significant way to help retain talent is to seek to understand them and bring the empathy component So many folks walk into work and they forget their empathy. That component goes a long way for a worker to say, hey, I was a frontline worker once, or where do you want to go in your life? What do you want to do? Help me understand so that maybe I can help you get here. You don't have to be that call center person for the rest of your life unless that's what you want to do. Mm, And that ties to the well being of that worker. A lot of times it's not addressed. There was a Gallup poll study that found that the biggest source of burnout and problems was unfair treatment at work. Because again, that frontline manager is going, "Oh, you didn't do 30 calls today, you only did 29." That's just ludicrous. We need to measure those folks on the things that help them understand what we're trying to measure and ask them what we should be measuring. Because if they're part of the measurement and understanding it and learning it and suggesting it, that they're part of the group. And again, that component is so important.
Yeah, I think to jump in on that, I think that's just such an Brian, if you want to go back just one second, it's such an important point about buy-in. We see a lot in frontline workers, these measurements about being on the floor or uptime, call time, or break time, and et cetera. And it's like, at the end of the day, in the micro, day to day, how is that solving a problem for your organization? And to bring your workers into the conversation around what we're measuring, again, it doesn't have to be at odds with your business, but there can be a pragmatic, empathetic, and compassionate approach towards measurement, which we're going to really dive into in the next slide. But generating buy-in is really important. Oh, and if you want folks to take it seriously and have it be credible, it has to reflect the times we're in.
One of the things I just noticed, I think it's Karen, if I'm saying the name right, notice that they've got a lot of workers and each manager may have several dozen agents that they need to deal with. And how do they find the time, given that worker may turn over, to get to know them? And quite honestly, you could spend, in my opinion, 2 minutes with somebody, and it could be the most impactful thing in their life that day because you don't know what's going on in their world. But 2 minutes could prevent and reduce that turnover. Just a thought, because you're right, we're all busy, but uh, don't forget they're human beings. They're people too. And I think that will go a very long way in helping reduce that turnover.
I
And I
absolutely love that notion, Cynthia, that, just 2 minutes will make all the difference in the world.
and I
You who need it sorely. Absolutely 100% agree.
Yeah, I want to jump in. I think Tiffany Sims from Diversity Talent Scouts, you have a great point here. How are you tends to be a question that gets robotic or rehearsed. Why not tell me something that you would change here? I think that's a really good point. It's something that I think is cultural. I think it's funny. I'm going to talk more about this concept in general, but how we treat and approach frontline workers versus say your IT or business professional labor categories is so different. When you bring in an IT or a business professional into a project environment as a contingent worker, a lot of the times, let's break stuff, let's build fast, so let's change it. What can you offer? Those aren't the questions that are being asked of frontline workers. It's here's your job. It's a prescription. And I think to generate that sort of engagement and morale boost, I think it's super important to do that. We have a saying at NTech, whether you've been here for 5 minutes or 5 years, if you've got an idea, bring it up. We want to talk about it. And I think it's a cultural thing that needs to be done with the folks who are leading and directing these frontline worker categories. Why wouldn't you want these folks who have worked in other frontline worker jobs? Why wouldn't you want to borrow some of their ideas? Why wouldn't you want to see if something that's worked elsewhere, a winning idea has worked? And so I love that point, Tiffany. I thank you for bringing it up but it has to be cultural. I have a friend who, works in civil engineering, and he brought up something, and the response was, "Frank, sit down and do your job." And
Mhm.
that cannot be the culture. That's a and he left that company to no surprise. But it's one of those things where, as an organization, you have to be thirsty for new ideas. You have to be adaptable to change. And it's not enough just to ask the question. And you have to demonstrate that you're actually vetting it through. Nobody's proposing that every idea that gets brought up by every employee gets implemented, but it goes such a long way to say, you know what, that's great. Let's have a discussion about it. It may work. It may not work. There might be a middle way it works. But to show that is super important. Culture building and making people feel engaged to the work that they do.
Well, and you have to build, as you said, build that culture where the workers are comfortable and confident in giving their suggestions. It, a lot of these folks, it's their first job in the marketplace. I remember my first job, and somebody said you have to go talk to a vice president, and I sweat through my suit. I was so nervous. I didn't sleep the night before. And as you get more mature in business, you learn that these folks put on their pants the same way you do, and they're just people. The frontline worker could be their first call center job, and they're scared to death to talk to their manager. And so, how does that either business or that manager build a culture of one that it's okay to talk to me and not just, I have an open door policy because that doesn't work with newbies, but you got, may help them feel comfortable by listening, engaging at least a little bit. Because if you just put them on that phone and say, you've got to do 28 calls today, and tomorrow you have to do 29, and the next day you have to do 30, that turnover is just going to keep going. How are they doing? I think that, yeah, there we go. Go
Alright.
ahead, Jimmy.
All right.
This one's
So yeah, yeah. So we have, I talked about this earlier about business centric, not worker centric, and measure what matters. And this is really important, when we talk about frontline work KPI or business centric, worker centric. These KPI historically have been about output and one call resolution. How much can you put on a line? How much can be packed? How many calls can you take? That's a very business oriented point of view versus work. This is where we go back to our one big thing around, or our bottom line up front around, it's disconnected from what workers want. Workers at the end of the day want a good, they want to do a good job. They want to please customers. They don't want to have dissatisfaction. But when you put these sort of constraints on them around, uptime, well, one, they're going to find ways to game the system. I've heard so many, I know a few stories without naming companies of folks who have, call it X minute calls. What do they do? Instead of making a call directly, they call the 1-800 number and dial through, and then you get your 2-minute call. So first of all, you're going to get people gaming the system anyway. So you need to identify like metrics that are worker centric, because at the end of the day, that's going to produce a better result for the organization anyway and lead to less turnover, which is disruptive. Cynthia and I were talking a lot about what we should be measuring are promotion rates. I think that's really important. What percentage of your employees are being promoted beyond their current job? And worker NPS and referrals generated. I think it's generally agreed upon in staffing that one of the best sources of talent is by referral. And if you have a population that's giving you minimal referrals, I think that says something about the way your environment is being run. Somebody asked a question like, what are part, I'm paraphrasing, but leading indicators for turnover? If your labor category is not generating referrals and your worker NPS is low, that's a leading sign. And if your workers are not getting promoted, I mean, there's a saying, that I've been thought my whole life, you move up or you move out. And I think a lot of people feel that way. So promotion rates, worker NPS, and how many referrals are being generated is super important. But along that line, we get into rethink generally accepted baselines. Cynthia brought up 40% negative turnover in a call center. I think many on this call would be like, yeah, that's about right, plus or minus. I always challenge everyone to think about the service that staffing suppliers provide, this concept of providing talent and human beings. Try and think about it if it was a product, what it was an iPhone. Could you imagine what would Apple do if 40% of iPhones that were sold on November 10th by the end of the year were returned or they were exchanged and returned early and they didn't follow the 1 or 2 year life cycle? Apple would be freaking out. They'd be like, what is going on? They would be looking at, the experience, the UI, UX of the software. They'd be doing a deep dive into the hardware. But yet we sit here and for the most part, kind of accept that this is the way it is. And I think that's something that needs to change. We talk about the future of work. Think about these metrics through the lens of what if a product was returned at that rate or left the life cycle that early. When you talk about an iPhone having a 1 or 2 year life cycle and before people replace it. Go
Jimmy,
ahead.
as you said, this point really drove home for me is when people talk about products and the return rate of products, there is an uproar, there's action items, there's steps to take to improve it. And I get, there's a mechanical component to it, but why isn't there so equal, if not more emphasis on the people? Because
Right.
it's the same thing, turnover, return rate, same kind of thing. So
Mm.
we've gotten away as a society for frontline workers to look at, again, I'm focusing on the individual. I have a psychology degree, so it's all
Yeah.
about, you know, how did I make you feel? How do you feel? That to me is such an easy way to reduce turnover.
Yeah. Well, you've got a psychology degree and a philosophy degree in me over here on the call. So we're going to talk and pontificate a little bit. There's a comment I saw I definitely want to address as we're in here around, I think with remote and hybrid workplaces on the rise, these boundaries to keep work life and personal life separate seem to fade, isn't it? I would say no. I actually want to bring something that might be touching sort of the fourth parallel here, the line around this concept of quiet quitting. And it's something that I've thought a lot about because I was like, okay, it came to light and I was like, what is quiet quitting? I've never heard that phrase before, but I looked it up. And from what I understand, it's people who come in 9 to 5 or start to finish, could do their job, nothing more, nothing less. And I got to thinking, and then in the name of having a work-life balance, they're not staying late. They're not going above and beyond. They're doing their job with competency and efficiency, but they're starting at fishing and that's it. They're not going above and beyond. They're not seeking extra projects. And I sat here and I started wondering, is that a bad thing? And I don't think it is. And I think we sit here and we have this general kind of like, there's a lot on LinkedIn, this big freak out around this concept of quiet quitting and what's going to happen in the workplace. There's a saying, I didn't make this up. I saw it. There's only 4 corner offices, and that's obviously a metaphor. But there's only so many places in leadership to go. We need a workforce that does come in from start to finish and does what they do what they're supposed to do efficiently. They do what they're supposed to do with competence, and then they leave and have that personal life to come back so they're charged up for that next day. So I don't see it fading. I think that we should embrace the concept of coming in and leaving and doing your job with efficiency and competency. That's okay for a large swath of workers. All
Moving
right.
on, workforce development, the key concepts we're trying to share today. We got so much great stuff, and I love the dialogue going through the chat. Keep it coming. Submit your questions using the Q&A button. We'll go ahead and invite you on the stage if you want to have your 15 minutes of fame. So go ahead and take it away.
All right. So workforce development, fostering what that means, Stantec, fostering individual growth and alignment with future business. So workforce development is huge. It's something that I'm excited for us to talk about. So let's just dive in, Brian. We can go to the next here. Okay. So frontline workers rank job growth as the #1 employment need above pay and job security. This was eye-opening to me. Brian, you can flip to the next slide since we're running through this here. This is the graphic. Job growth, I mean, not by much, but ahead for sure. And so a few numbers, I'm just going to fly through because I think this is super important. 48% of retention budget is spent on personal and professional development opportunities. 70% of leaders report that business impact from reskilling has been greater than or equal to the investment. So even for the people who aren't empathetic, passionate, or altruistic, and you just see green, it works for people. And talent supply chain is the number one issue on the minds of CEOs. And 75% of frontline workers want to be promoted. Only 25% achieve it. This to me and the frontline workers paints the picture of, I think, something that we need to have a mindset shift. I think about your software developer one or two in terms of workforce development. All of them want to be promoted. And we see them move into senior software or software architect or even IT product manager, et cetera. The frontline workers, only 1 out of 4 people get promoted. And we don't consider that pathway. Why is it acceptable for the frontline worker to not be promoted and to be stuck in that sort of baseline job when we don't see that as acceptable in any other career path? It's not like there's not a desire. We clearly see 3 out of 4 workers want to achieve, that they want to achieve a promotion, but only 25 are. I think that's a really jarring statistic and something as we look forward, we need to be investing in workforce development and job growth. If going back to the point, retain, engage, and increase productivity. Why would people not be engaged and productive? Well, because they're hitting a wall. And we talk about the paper ceiling in a few minutes here, but sometimes there are unnecessary barriers to job growth, and it's something that we really need to reconsider in that. Cynthia,
One of the things really interesting there to not kind of reinforce that point about job growth being so critical is I was watching a video just the other day where somebody said, if you've been at the job for 5 years or more, they guarantee you're getting underpaid. And so, and when you look at a lot of people who are seeing retention issues or having a difficult time to fill, their first thing goes to pay as opposed to some of the intangible things that we can do to make people want to go there, become a client of choice or a destination employee. I think that is a huge insight, and I'm really glad you bottom lined it up front.
If you told me you were going to train me and not give me a raise, but you were going to train me so I could get a promotion, at which point I would get a raise, I'd stick around all day long. All right, audience submitted question. So how does professional development increase retention? What sorts of investments have the best source of return? So Jimmy, what are your thoughts?
yeah, and I think kind of hit it in reverse here. We see that the number one source, the desires of a frontline worker is job growth and professional development. If you're not giving it to them, someone else will. More and more, we're seeing workforce development programs pop up, like train folks. But I also think about sorts of investment that have the best. If you are consistently, if you have a pathway, a career path through your frontline worker that maybe takes them through call center representative to maybe into a help desk, maybe a systems engineer, something like that. And you can create that funnel and that pipe. Well, one, you're going to increase retention. You're going to have people in that you can forecast for. Anytime you can forecast, it's going to save you money versus doing things ad hoc. And then if you create that pipeline over time, you are going to have to backfill your call center representative, not necessarily your systems engineer. And so you're going to see this sort of retention take place, but you're also going to have return because you are creating these pipelines, which save money at the end of the day.
Go to the next slide. So this really is the answers to that question, more or less,
Yeah.
in the sense that invest in training, invest in the worker, make sure that they're given opportunity. And I'll point out the bullet number 2 here is when it comes to contingent workforce, every company goes, oh, I can't train them. I can't, offer them opportunities to grow because that would be considered co-employment. Honestly, if you look at that, look at the return on the investment for the retention that you're training, and there's no turnover, keeping in mind that $24,000 cost I experienced, I guarantee you're going to get greater revenue and more customers that are going to far outweigh any co-employment concerns at all. And those workers are going to be happy So they're not going to be the ones who are going to go to some place and say, "Oh, I'm a employee." So invest in those folks. They need career pathways. We already showed a slide that said that's the number one thing workers are looking for. So why wouldn't you invest in them?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a great. And I talked a little bit about career pathways are overlooked for frontline workers. We've touched on that quite a bit and how it's just not the same in other business professional and IT labor categories. Kind of hit on co-employment. Investing in learning and development is super important. We actually at NTech have a learning and development division of human resources focused on providing these sort of learning pathways for all employees. We have we did a call center pilot program at the onset of the pandemic that I'm just so proud of. So we had a tremendous amount of our call center representatives laid off because you couldn't go into work because of the pandemic. And call centers, believe it or not, just 2 years ago were not designed to be working from home. And so the equipment just wasn't. So what we did is we created an L&D pilot where we basically kept folks employed, trained them on advanced call center techniques, created a curriculum with weekly calls. And the whole point was to keep that, to reduce the learning loss of being in a call center, advance them new skills, keep people prepared. You knew this wasn't going to be forever. And well, at a certain point, we knew it wasn't going to be forever. I think for a moment, we all thought maybe this was forever. At a certain point, we were like, this isn't going to be forever. And so what was really awesome about that was 95% of our class graduated and increased skill. 95% we baselined their skills and then they increased at the end. And then beyond that, of the people who completed, we had something like 92% get replaced with our clients within 30 days of them reopening in the
Wow.
summer. That was amazing. And so the concept of invest in learning and development is so great. And it's such an important part. We talk about a time within our people operations department. I was having this conversation literally this morning. If Andrea's on the call, she was the one I was talking. We were talking about the concept of coaching in these frontline workers. We'll get a coaching request for you. Some of you buyers out there, you might send them to staffing suppliers like, hey, coach them. We got that one, what's the point of the coach? What's the goal of the coach? It's to prevent future coaching. That's the whole point. It's to correct behavior. And so can somebody in HR do that? Perhaps, but this is where learning and development comes in. Have somebody there be like, okay, you're getting coached on A. You're not performing in this area. Okay, we're going to have that per-functionary call with you, but now we're also going to bring in learning and development to help you overcome that obstacle. And so that's super important in learning and development to incorporate that in your strategy. But then, yeah, in terms of moving forward in workforce development and advancing workers, this is from Opportunity at Work. I give them all the credit for a lot of what I'm about to say about the paper ceiling. Here, it is a quote. Millions of workers with in-demand skills and experience overlooked for higher wage jobs they don't have a bachelor's degree. Companies stuck more at talent treadmill, desperate to build a reliable pipeline of skilled workers. Two allies separated by an insidious and invisible barrier. Now the enemy has named the paper ceiling. That's right from Opportunity at Work. I think they're a great partner. They've done an incredible amount of work here. I'm really proud to be in the state of Maryland, where recently almost all state government jobs have been removed from having a bachelor's degree. You have really wonderfully qualified people who cannot reach that net level and get stuck, disengaged, and ultimately low retention because they can't advance because of this paper ceiling. So I would reflect on anybody here who's in a position to consider a taxonomy or a labor category. Yeah. Are we looking at skills or are we looking at a degree? All right.
Making the case for change.
All right. This is a part that I'm gonna dive into here. Some problems to solve here around. If you're looking to build a business case around workforce development, these are the slides for you. You have problems to solve from a few different areas. Executives and hiring managers, put simply, line managers are grappling with productivity and retention. Middle manager and leadership teams need more channels for highly skilled or niche jobs. Contingent workforce operations, there are challenges to broadening access to talent, to fill vacancies faster and retain their best workers. And then workers themselves. Too many workers are stuck in dead-end jobs without the time, money, or investment from their employers to learn more lucrative skills. So this is what we're trying to solve with a workforce development program. All right. So the opportunities we have here is our increasing workforce efficiency According to McKinsey, I mentioned this earlier, 70% of business leaders report a positive ROI for reskilling, with half saying it's driving bottom line growth. So talk about productivity, workforce efficiency. What do you want to call it? Workforce development can create that, like I said, 70 in the McKinsey survey are saying it's doing that right to their bottom line. We can increase hiring efficiency. These sort of talent pipelining and nurturing programs yield a 5% program-wide cost savings and reduces your time to fill about 5 days. So benefits are amplified by training and coaching. That's the end. That's the bottom line here. Diversifying the workforce and positively impacting the community. We talk about underrepresented groups in our programs here quite a bit, and we have some statistics around that. Around veterans, we're working a lot with veterans right now. We're in the capital region. 18% of the veteran population are underrepresented groups, but 42% of the homeless veteran population are underrepresented groups. So by solving this and providing workforce development, we can diversify the workforce and impact the community. Community is a really big core value. And if you go to our website, you will see community is everywhere. We just did a really awesome United Way event called the Way Home Project, where all of us got together and helped put departments together for folks transitioning out of homelessness in a lot of ways. And then lastly, retaining adaptable, resilient, and disciplined workers. 90%, I'm going to start there, 90%. Nationally, across various occupations, retention rates for apprenticeship are 90%. Compare that to the 40% negative attrition or 60% that we're talking about in call center. So can you go from 60 to 90? Yeah, you can. This is around retaining the adaptable, resilient, disciplined workers. People want the apprenticeship at the end of the time. They want the workforce development. So these are the opportunities we have here today. All right. So the path we kind of talked about, here's kind of the playbook. Hiring managers at CW Ops, analyze existing job requirements, evaluating job requirements, eliminating barriers, broadening access to qualified workers. Thanks, Alan. CW Ops and staffing partners develop career pathways for contingent workers, designing a learning pathway for frontline workers that provides skills and qualification for higher paying jobs, hard to fill jobs, and aligning curriculums to meet challenging hiring or business objectives. And for the staffing partners, incorporate coaching into the workforce development efforts. We're doing this. It's working. I can tell you firsthand, establishing agreements with professional coaches. We're bringing it in-house like we've done. Elisa, again, if you're on the call, hat tip. Establishing professional coaches and assigning coaches to regularly meet with workers. Huge. Invest in the people, as Cynthia said.
And
then
I'll just add one comment is
Yeah.
I don't think the purpose of coaching is to not have to coach. I think it's an ongoing, always coaching should always happen regardless.
Coaching is a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah.
It may you become a better executive the more you do it.
I think that's a great point. I kind of
Right.
separate my meeting into two. What I mean by issue-driven coaching around like, hey, this is what's going on. I think that's what we're trying to course correct. But when you talk about greater learning and development and performance coaching, 100% agree, Cynthia. That's forever. That's a long-term aim. We don't want to stop. The whole point isn't there. But when we talk about coaching, and the reason I say that too is, I don't think a lot of buyers realize that employers are there to help coach to skills. And when you say, hey, so-and-so's having a problem doing, say, VLOOKUP with Excel, we need somebody to coach. So many organizations just think there's nothing we can do, but we are here to help. That we're there to do. But yes, I think we're just about at time here, and that kind of covers it. Cynthia, you and I joked we could do this for 2 hours, and I think we tried. So
I think this is such great dialogue. I think one of the things I loved about working with you guys is that you have the temerity to put the actual data points into the presentation, which is almost never done. Fantastic work. Cynthia, Jimmy, thank you so much. If you have questions, there's two different things you can do. One, you could reach out to this amazing panel right here. You can see the scans, their phone numbers, their emails, their LinkedIn profiles, and obviously the QR codes for the LinkedIn profiles. You can scan them yourself. We are.
Phone numbers weren't right. The phone numbers aren't right.
We'll fix that. We're obsessed with feedback, so we certainly hope you'll take a moment to complete the survey. Link right there. Intech Frontline is the coded SurveyMonkey, or you could scan that code. And again, everybody who completes a survey is going to be entered into a defined event for education Yeti mug, which will be in every of your
Can
friends.
we get one of those, Brian? How do I get one?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I'll make sure I send it over to you. If you want to continue this amazing discussion, join a roundtable with 4 of them at the end of it. And again, I want to encourage you to join us again for our December webinar or later this month, new extended workforce stack incorporating marketplaces, sponsored by Tomix and featuring Sean Ring, Vice President of People 2.0. Cynthia, Jimmy, thank you so much. Kenneth, thank you so much for doing such a great job curating this. And hopefully you'll stick around for some roundtable sessions for a bit. Thank you so much for
Absolutely.
it. Take care.
Thanks a lot.
See you in the roundtables.